Its rule. Definition. Principle that 20% of causes often lead to 80% of effects. Example. In the Death Star takedown, 20% of the rebel pilots caused 80% of the damage. Word A. B testing. Definition. Comparing two versions to determine the better performer. Example. Testing two Death Star blueprints to see which is more impenetrable. Word AC. Actual cost. Definition. The real expense of performing activities. Example. The AC for constructing the Death Star exceeded initial estimates. Word. Accept. Risk response. Definition. Recognizing a risk but not actively responding. Example. Acknowledging but not immediately fixing a small flaw in the Death Star's design. Word. Acceptance criteria. Definition. Conditions that must be met for approval. Example. The Death Star must withstand X-wing assaults to meet criteria. Word. Active listening. Definition. Fully concentrating on the speaker's message. Example. Imperial officers practicing active listening to improve Death Star crew coordination. Word. Activity attributes. Definition. Characteristics defining aspects of a project task. Example. The Death Star's laser installation activity includes attributes like duration and resources needed. Word. Activity dependency. Definition. The relationship between project tasks. Example. The Death Star's shield must be up before installing the main weapon. Word. Activity duration estimates. Definition. Projected time to complete a task. Example. Estimating time for training Death Star operators. Word. Activity list. Definition. Document detailing project tasks. Example. A list detailing all stages of the Death Star's construction phases. Word. Activity. Definition. Example. Constructing the Death Star superlaser is a critical activity. Word. Administrative closure. Definition. Formalizing project completion. Example. Documenting the finalization of the Death Star's construction phase. Word. Affinity diagram. Definition. Sorts ideas into groups for analysis. Example. Organizing Death Star feedback into themes for improvements. Word. Agile life cycles. Definition. Iterative, adaptive project approaches. Example. Adapting Death Star construction as issues arise. Word. Agile project management. Definition. Iterative, value-focused management approach. Example. Building the Death Star in phases. Adapting to new intelligence. Word. Agile release planning. Definition. Plans iterations for product releases. Example. Scheduling Death Star system integrations in phases. Word. Agreements. Definition. Documents outlining project intentions. Example. The Empire's contract with contractors to build the Death Star. Word. Analogous estimating. Definition. Estimates based on historical data. Example. Predicting Death Star completion time from previous battle stations. Word. Approved change requests. Definition. Authorized requests for modifications. Example. Approval for upgraded Death Star laser after testing. Word. Assumption and constraint analysis. Definition. Evaluates project suppositions and limits. Example. Checking if Death Star can be built within time and resource constraints. Word. Attribute sampling data. Definition. Counted data, like defects. Example. Number of faults found in Death Star's hull plating. Word. Auditing. Definition. Example. Reviewing Death Star project adherence to Empire regulations. Word. Autocratic. Definition. Decision made by one person. Example. Word. Avoid risk response. Definition. Eliminating a project threat. Example. Changing Death Star specs to avoid vulnerability. Word. Back budget at completion. Definition. Total projected budget. Example. Estimated total funds to complete the Death Star. Word. Bar chart. Definition. Visual schedule representation. Example. Displaying Death Star construction milestones on a timeline. Word. Benchmarking. Definition. Comparing to identify best practices. Example. Comparing Death Star systems to other Imperial stations. Word. Benefit cost analysis. Definition. Evaluates project's financial viability. Example. Assessing Death Star's potential gains versus construction costs. Word. Benefits management plan. Definition. Outlines processes to sustain benefits. Example. Plan ensuring Death Star continues delivering strategic advantages. Word. Bidder conferences. Definition. Meetings clarifying bid requirements. Example. Gathering contractors for Death Star project bidding clarity. Word. Bottom-up estimating. Definition. Detailed cost estimation method. Example. Calculating Death Star costs from individual component estimates. Word. Brainstorming. Definition. Group session generating ideas. Example. Team discussing potential Death Star defenses. Word. Burn down chart. Definition. Tracks project completion progress. Example. Charting daily progress on Death Star construction tasks. Word. Business case. Definition. Justifies project investment. Example. Outlining Death Star's strategic importance for funding approval. Word. Business risk. Definition. Potential for profit or loss. Example. Weighing Death Star's impact on Imperial resources. Word. Business value. Definition. Benefit from a business initiative. Example. The Death Star increasing the Empire's control. Word. CCB. Change control board. Definition. Group deciding on project changes. Example. Board reviewing alterations to Death Star design. Word. Change control form. Definition. Document for proposing project changes. Example. Submitting form to adjust Death Star shield specs. Word. Change control system. Definition. Procedures for managing alterations. Example. System tracking updates to Death Star design documents. Word. Change management. Definition. Structured approach to transition. Example. Overseeing alterations to Death Star project scope. Word. Change management plan. Definition. Outlines change control processes. Example. Plan dictating Death Star's change approval process. Word. Change request. Definition. Proposal for project modification. Example. Requesting additional resources for Death Star construction phase. Word. Checklist analysis. Definition. Review using a predefined list. Example. Inspecting Death Star's safety protocols checklist. Word. CI. Continuous improvement. Definition. Ongoing enhancement efforts. Example. Iteratively improving Death Star operational procedures. Word. Close project or phase process. Definition. Concluding project activities. Example. Finalizing Death Star construction project phase. Word. Closeout meetings. Definition. Discussions at project end. Example. Meeting to conclude Death Star's testing phase. Word. Co-location. Definition. Strategy for team placement. Example. Centralizing Death Star engineers for collaboration. Word. Coaching. Definition. Providing guidance for better decisions. Example. Mentoring new officers on Death Star operations. Word. Code of accounts. Definition. Unique identifier for WBS components. Example. Numbering system for Death Star's construction tasks. Word. Code of ethics and professional conduct. Definition. Standards for ethical behavior. Example. Guidelines for conduct among Death Star project team members. Word. Communication requirements analysis. Definition. Determine stakeholders' information needs. Example. Analyzing who needs Death Star plans updates. Word. Communication styles assessment. Definition. Identifies preferred stakeholder communication. Example. Tailoring updates to Rebel Alliance liaison styles. Word. Communications management plan. Definition. Outlines project information dissemination. Example. Plan for broadcasting Death Star progress. Word. Configuration management plan. Definition. Manages changes to project artifacts. Example. Tracking adjustments to Death Star's blueprints. Word. Context diagram. Definition. Visual representation of project scope. Example. Diagram showing Death Star's operational context. Word. Control account. Definition. Management point for performance measurement. Example. Monitoring Death Star construction budget and schedule. Word. Control procurements process. Definition. Oversees contract performance and adjustments. Example. Managing contracts for Death Star material supply. Word. Controlling PMO. Definition. PMO that enforces compliance. Example. PMO ensuring Death Star project adheres to standards. Word. CoQ. Cost of quality. Definition. Total cost ensuring product quality. Example. Investing in Death Star quality checks. Word. Cost aggregation. Definition. Summing cost estimates of work packages. Example. Calculating total cost for Death Star shield generator. Word. Cost baseline. Definition. Approved project budget for comparison. Example. Baseline for tracking Death Star financials. Word. Cost management plan. Definition. Describes project cost control methods. Example. Guidelines for managing Death Star's expenses. Word. Cost of conformance. Definition. Money spent to prevent failures. Example. Investing in Death Star quality materials upfront. Word. Cost of nonconformance. Definition. Costs resulting from failures. Example. Cost to fix Death Star design flaws post-completion. Word. CPA of contract. Definition. Costs paid plus award fee. Example. Incentivizing contractor for exceptional Death Star work. Word. CPFF contract. Definition. Reimbursement plus fixed profit fee. Example. Contract for Death Star consultants fees. Word. CPI. Cost performance index. Definition. Measures budgeted resource cost efficiency. Example. Assessing Death Star project spending effectiveness. Word. CPI contract. Definition. Cost reimbursement plus incentive fee. Example. Bonus for early completion of Death Star phase. Word. Critical path. Definition. Longest duration project activity sequence. Example. Identifying essential milestones for Death Star launch. Word. Critical path method. CPM. Definition. Determines project longest activity sequence. Example. Planning Death Star construction timeline. Word. CV. Cost variance. Definition. Budget deficit or surplus. Example. Calculating Death Star's budget status. Word. CV. Cost variance. Formula. Definition. Formula for budget status. Example. Death Star's cost performance calculation. Word. De facto regulations. Definition. Widely adopted non-mandatory regulations. Example. Common standards for Death Star contractor safety. Word. De jure regulations. Definition. Legally mandated regulations. Example. Galactic Empire's legal requirements for Death Star specs. Word. Decision tree analysis. Definition. Evaluates options amid uncertainty. Example. Deciding on Death Star's defense systems amidst risks. Word. Decomposition. Definition. Dividing project scope into smaller parts. Example. Breaking down the Death Star into core components. Word. Directions of influence. Definition. Stakeholder influence categorization. Example. Charting how various groups affect the Death Star project. Word. Discretionary dependency. Definition. Preferred sequence based on best practices. Example. Scheduling Death Star's reactor construction after the frame. Word. DoD. Definition of done. Definition. Criteria to mark a deliverable as complete. Example. Checklist for each Death Star subsystems completion. Word. Door. Definition of ready. Definition. Checklist ensuring readiness to work on a requirement. Example. Preconditions for starting Death Star control room design. Word. EC. Estimated completion. Definition. Forecasted total project cost. Example. Predicted overall spending to complete the Death Star. Word. EEF. Enterprise environmental factors. Definition. External influences on a project. Example. Galactic politics impacting Death Star construction. Word. Effect-based risk classification. Definition. Major project risk impact analysis. Example. Assessing risks to Death Star's timeline and budget. Word. Effort. Definition. Labor units needed to complete work. Example. Man hours required for Death Star's weaponry installation. Word. Elapsed time. Definition. Calendar time for activity completion. Example. Time from start to finish of Death Star's hangar bay. Word. EMV. Expected monetary value. Definition. Calculation of average uncertain future outcomes. Example. Calculating financial implications of risks to Death Star project. Word. EV. Earned value. Definition. Value of work done compared to budget. Example. Measuring completed sections of the Death Star against budget. Word. Earned value management. Definition. Technique integrating scope, time, and cost. Example. Performance measurement for Death Star project phases. Word. FF. Finish to finish. Definition. Successor activities finish linked to predecessors. Example. Death Star interior can't finish before the exterior is done. Word. FFP contract. Firm fixed price contract. Definition. Fixed payment regardless of seller's costs. Example. Contract for Death Star's turbo laser at a fixed cost. Word. Fixed price contract. Definition. Fee set for a defined work scope. Example. Agreed sum for Death Star's blueprint development. Word. Float. Also called slack. Definition. Schedule flexibility without delaying the project. Example. Extra days available before impacting Death Star's launch date. Word. FPPA contract. Definition. Fixed price contract with price adjustment provisions. Example. Building Death Star with materials cost adjusted for inflation. Word. FPI contract. Definition. Fixed price contract with performance-based incentive fee. Example. Bonus for completing Death Star's core ahead of schedule. Word. Free float. Definition. Time and activity can be delayed without impacting successors. Example. Delay in Death Star's armory installation, not affecting overall schedule. Word. Functional organization. Definition. Structure where staff is grouped by specialty. Project manager has limited authority. Example. Death Star development where departments operate independently. Word. Funding limit reconciliation. Definition. Aligning expenditures with funding limits. Example. Adjusting Death Star construction phases to budget constraints. Word. Incremental life cycle. Definition. Project scope defined early, but details evolve with iterations. Example. Building Death Star in phases with functionality added in each step. Word. Influence impact grid. Definition. Classifying stakeholders by their impact and influence on a project. Example, assessing which stakeholders can influence Death Star's design changes. Word, information radiator. Definition, visual display of project information for transparency. Example, displaying Death Star project status updates in common areas. Word, insurable risk. Definition, risk only associated with loss, insurable to offset potential loss. Example, purchasing insurance for the Death Star against construction accidents. Word, IRR, internal rate of return. Definition, return rate on investment. Higher IRR indicates lucrative project. Example, calculating IRR for investing in Death Star technologies. Word, iterative life cycle. Definition, similar to incremental life cycle, project scope defined early, refined through iterations. Example, designing Death Star with repetitive testing and refinement cycles. Word, JAD, joint application design. Definition, collaborative workshops with SMEs and development teams. Example, sessions for optimizing Death Star control software. Word, key performance indicator, key performance indicator. Definition, metric for evaluating performance against objectives. Example, tracking KPIs for Death Star construction speed and efficiency. Word, lag. Definition, time a successor activity is delayed relative to a predecessor. Example, waiting period after Death Star frame completion before starting on the power systems. Word, lead. Definition, time a successor activity can be advanced relative to a predecessor. Example, initiating Death Star interior work before the exterior is fully completed. Word, lean. Definition, method focusing on outcomes with minimal waste. Example, applying lean strategies to streamline Death Star supply chain management. Word, lessons learned register. Definition, document recording knowledge gained during a project. Example, compiling insights from Death Star test failures. Word, lessons learned repository. Definition, historical information about lessons learned in projects. Example, archive of past Death Star project outcomes for reference. Word, make or buy analysis. Definition, deciding between external purchase or internal production. Example, considering whether to fabricate Death Star components or buy them. Word, make or buy decisions. Definition, determining whether to create internally or purchase externally. Example, deciding to outsource Death Star laser systems or develop in-house. Word, matrix organization. Definition, structure where project manager and functional manager share authority. Example, Death Star project manager collaborating with various department heads. Word, MBI, minimum business increment. Definition, smallest value addition to a product benefiting the business. Example, the minimum viable upgrade to Death Star weaponry. Word, milestone charts or Gantt charts. Definition, project schedule chart showing major milestones. Example, Gantt chart outlining key delivery dates for Death Star phases. Word, milestone. Definition, significant event or point in a project. Example, completion of Death Star's primary weapon as a project milestone. Word, milestone list. Definition, identifies all milestones, indicates mandatory or optional status. Example, list of critical milestones for Death Star project timeline. Word, mind mapping. Definition, consolidating brainstormed ideas into a visual map. Example, mind map to integrate concepts for Death Star's defense strategy. Word, mind mapping process. Definition, generating ideas by making associations. Example, mind mapping session for Death Star emergency protocols. Word, mitigate. Definition, reducing risk likelihood or impact. Example, implementing safety measures to mitigate construction risks on the Death Star. Word, Monte Carlo simulation. Definition, computer simulation for predicting future events, analyzing risk. Example, using Monte Carlo simulation to forecast Death Star project completion risks. Here are the definitions and brief examples related to the Death Star takedown in Star Wars for each term. Multi-criteria decision analysis. Assesses options against different criteria. Example, Rebels used it to prioritize Death Star's vulnerabilities. MVP, minimum viable product, simplest working prototype. Example, Rebels basic X-Wing fighter was their MVP against the Death Star. Nominal group technique, group brainstorming with voting. Example, Rebels voted on best attack plan against Death Star. NPS, net promoter score. Loyalty measurement. Example, Rebel Alliance surveyed to assess if pilots would recommend joining their cause. NPV, net present value, formula, present value of net cash flows. Example, Rebels calculated NPV for Death Star rate investment. OPA, organizational process assets, company's historical resources. Example, Rebels prior battle plans were their OPAs. Parametric estimating, estimating using historical data. Example, Rebels estimated Death Star assault duration from past missions. Pareto chart, ranks causes of issues. Example, chart helped identify the main reasons for Rebel starfighter losses. PDM, precedence diagramming method. Scheduling with nodes. Example, Rebels planned attack sequences with PDM. Phase gate, checkpoint before next phase. Example, Rebels reviewed progress after each mission phase against Death Star. Planning package, undeveloped schedule component. Example, planning package used for undeveloped parts of Rebel mission planning. Plurality, decision by largest group fraction. Example, Rebel decision made by largest pilot group, not majority. PMI's project management information system. Tools for managing projects. Example, Rebels use PMIs to organize Death Star strike. Portfolio management, overseeing project collection. Example, Alliance leadership managed various missions as a portfolio. Portfolio management techniques, strategies for managing company units. Example, Rebels use techniques to manage their various cells and operations. Portfolio, collection of projects. Example, Rebel Alliance's portfolio included both diplomatic missions and combat operations. Power influence grid, stakeholder mapping tool. Example, Rebels assessed allies' influence on mission success. Power interest grid, stakeholder assessment tool. Example, used to categorize allies' power and interest in the mission. Precedence relationship, dependency and scheduling. Example, timing of Rebel fleet's arrival was based on such relationships. Predictive life cycle, project scope early. Example, Rebel mission to destroy Death Star was planned predictively. Probability and impact matrix, risks plotted by likelihood and effect. Example, used by Rebels to assess risks of Death Star attack. Probability distribution, outcomes with assigned likelihoods. Example, predicted success rates of various attack strategies on Death Star. Procurement management plan, acquisition strategy document. Example, Rebels plan for acquiring starfighter parts and weaponry. Procurement cell, statement of work, detailed procurement description. Example, specified types of spacecraft needed for Death Star assault. Product analysis, breakdown of product aspects. Example, analysis of the Death Star to find exploitable flaws. Product backlog, prioritized task list. Example, Rebels prioritize tasks necessary for Death Star attack. Product backlog grooming, backlog maintenance. Example, regularly updated to reflect changing mission priorities. Product box exercise, solution description activity. Example, Rebels could use this to brainstorm how to market the Death Star's destruction. Product owner, visionary for the product. Example, Mon Mothma acted as the product owner for the Death Star attack plan. Product roadmap, Visual plan of releases. Example, show the timeline of rebel missions leading to the main assault. Program management, coordinated project management. Example, organize multiple missions supporting Death Star's destruction. Program, related project activities. Example, the entire rebel campaign against the Empire was a program. Progressive elaboration, detailing work over time. Example, detailed plans for the Death Star raid evolved as new intelligence was gathered. Project artifact, project management document. Example, blueprints of the Death Star were crucial project artifacts. Project charter, project authorization document. Example, formal decree initiating the plan to take down the Death Star. Project governance, rules guiding project management. Example, Rebel Alliance had governance policies for the Death Star operation. Project lifecycle, phases from start to finish. Example, included planning and executing the Death Star attack. Project lifecycle phases, stages of project. Example, from reconnaissance to Death Star's destruction. Project management, applying knowledge to meet objectives. Example, coordinating rebel attack on the Death Star. Project manager, leader responsible for achieving objectives. Example, Luke Skywalker effectively acted as this during the final battle. Project phase, part of project lifecycle. Example, scouting phase was complete upon finding Death Star's weakness. Project requirements, conditions to satisfy needs. Example, the requirement was a precise hit in the Death Star's thermal exhaust port. Project schedule network diagram, shows project activities. Example, diagram the timing of rebel attacks on the Death Star. Project schedule, plan of project activities. Example, detailed timing for the rebel fleet's attack maneuvers. Project scope statement, defines project boundaries. Example, outline Death Star destruction goals. Project scope, project's deliverables, features. Example, Death Star's complete annihilation. Project team, individuals working on a project. Example, Luke, Leia, Han, etc. project, unique, temporary endeavor. Example, Death Star's takedown operation. Projectiles organization, project focused team structure. Example, Rebel Alliance's dedicated strike team. PV, present value. Today's value of future money. Example, estimating resource cost for the mission. PV, plan value, budget for work. Example, funds allocated for the X-Wing fighters. QFD, customer-driven product design. Example, X-Wing modifications for the mission. Qualitative risk analysis, assessing risk probability impact. Example, gauging Death Star missions risks. Quality audit, process performance review. Example, quality gate, phase transition checkpoint. Example, review before the final assault launch. Quality management plan, ensures quality objectives. Example, standards for rebel pilot training. Quality metrics, measures project attributes. Example, X-Wing fighter accuracy rates. Quality, fulfilling requirements. Example, high standard of rebel operations. Quantitative risk analysis, numerical risk evaluation. Example, calculating mission failure probabilities. RACI chart, stakeholder responsibility map. Example, assigning roles in the Death Star plan. RAM, resource work assignment grid. Example, assigning pilots to their fighters. RBS, risk source hierarchy. Example, listing potential mission failure causes. Regulations, government mandated requirements. Example, adhering to intergalactic warfare laws. Relative authority, project against functional manager power. Example, Mon Mothma versus squadron leaders. Requirements management plan, tracks requirements fulfillment. Example, ensuring all mission elements are addressed. Requirements traceability matrix, links requirements to deliverables. Example, matching rebel objectives to attack phases. Resource calendar, resource availability schedule. Example, pilot ship schedules for the mission. Resource leveling, balancing resource allocation. Example, distributing pilots evenly among squads. Resource management plan, details resource usage. Example, allocating X-Wings to pilots. Risk appetite, willingness to take risks. Example, rebel readiness for casualties. Risk categorization, organizing risks. Example, sorting risks by mission phase. Risk impact, potential effect of risks. Example, potential impact of an Imperial ambush. Risk management plan, outlines risk strategies. Example, rebel approach to unexpected events. Risk probability, chance of risk occurring. Example, likelihood of Imperial reinforcements. Risk register, records risks. Example, documented threats to rebel fighters. Risk threshold, risk acceptance level. Example, acceptable rebel casualty rates. Risk tolerance, maximum acceptable risk. Example, rebel limit for operational delays. Return on investment, profitability metric. Example, gains from destroying Death Star. Return on investment formula, income investment measure. Example, mission benefits versus costs. Root cause analysis, finding problem origins. Example, analyzing failed attack runs. Safe, agile development framework. Example, used for large-scale rebel operations. Salience model, stakeholder classification tool. Example, categorizing allies' importance to the mission. Schedule management plan, criteria for managing a project schedule. Example, in the Death Star project, the plan ensured timely completion of each construction phase. Scope baseline, project scopes approved details. Example, the Death Star's design specs and construction milestones were its scope baseline. Scope creep, project scope grows without changes to resources. Example, adding new weapons to the Death Star without extra time. Scope management plan, defines project scope management. Example, the plan outlined how the Death Star scope would be controlled. Scrum Master, facilitates Scrum team's efficiency. Example, ensured the Death Star software was developed on time. Scrum team, self-organizing, cross-functional team in Scrum. Example, designed the Death Star's trash compactor system. Scrum, agile framework for iterative development. Example, used to develop subsystems for the Death Star efficiently. Sequential relationships, project phases happen one after another. Example, Death Star's weapon system built after structure completion. SF, start to finish. One task can't end before another starts. Example, Death Star's core must start powering before shield testing can finish. SLA, service level agreement, contract detailing expected service levels. Example, agreement on the Death Star's trash compactor maintenance turnaround time. SOS, Scrum of Scrums, coordination method for multiple Scrum teams. Example, ensured various Death Star subsystems were integrated smoothly. Source selection criteria, buyer's desired seller attributes. Example, chose the Death Star's hyperdrive provider based on technology and reliability. Source-based risk classification, analyzing risks by origin. Example, identified supplier delay risks for the Death Star's construction. SPI, schedule performance index, measures schedule efficiency. Example, SPI of 0.90 indicated Death Star was behind schedule. Sprint backlog, tasks for Scrum team sprint. Example, included finalizing the Death Star's exhaust port defenses. Sprint planning, pre-sprint event defining work to be done. Example, plan tasks for the Death Star's control room sprint. Sprint retrospective, team meeting analyzing sprints process. Example, reviewed communication issues in the Death Star's laser development sprint. Sprint retrospective meeting. Review sprint outcomes, improves processes. Example, Death Star team improved waste management after a retrospective. Sprint review demonstrates sprint achievements. Example, showed completed Death Star hangar bay in a review. Sprint review meeting evaluates sprint results with stakeholders. Example, Death Star stakeholders reviewed completed sectors. Sprint, Scrum's time boxed iteration. Example, 4-week sprint to install Death Star's navigation system. SS start to start. One task starts with another. Example, Death Star's core reactor began as shield testing started. Stakeholder analysis identifies project stakeholders' interests. Example, analyzed who would influence the Death Star's completion. Stakeholder analysis process. Lists, stakeholders, and interests. Example, listed the Empire's leadership as interested in the Death Star's progress. Stakeholder analysis steps. Identifies stakeholders, assesses impacts. Example, identified senators and contractors involved with the Death Star. Stakeholder cube, models stakeholder groups three-dimensionally. Example, used to categorize Death Star project influencers. Stakeholder engagement assessment matrix, tracks stakeholder engagement levels. Example, monitored how involved the Death Star's engineers were. Stakeholder engagement plan, strategies for involving stakeholders. Example, the plan ensured the Emperor's regular updates on the Death Star. Stakeholder register, document with stakeholder information. Example, included all Death Star project contractors and overseers. Stakeholders, those affected by a project. Example, the Death Star project affected everyone from the Emperor to the construction droids. Standard, an established model or example. Example, the Death Star followed galactic standards for megastructures. Statistical sampling process, divides data for analysis. Example, used to ensure quality of the Death Star's material. Statistical sampling, inspects a population subset. Example, randomly checked thermal exhaust ports on the Death Star. Storyboarding, sketching the sequence of a project's scenes. Example, visualizing the Death Star assault plan. Supportive PMO, assists projects with resources and guidance. Example, providing templates for the Rebel Alliance. Schedule variance, SV, earned value minus planned value. Example, measuring Death Star project's timeline deviations. SWOT analysis, evaluating strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, threats. Example, assessing Rebel Alliance's position. TAMP contract, payment for actual work done. Example, contracting pilots for the mission. T-shaped skills, expert in one, knowledgeable in many. Example, Luke's piloting and Jedi skills. Tacit knowledge, unspoken, intrinsic understanding. Example, Obi-Wan's Jedi intuition. Team charter, defines team norms and goals. Example, Rebel Alliance's mission statement. Team management plan, outlines team roles and timelines. Example, scheduling for X-Wing pilots. Team resource management, organizing and leading the team. Example, Mon Mothma overseeing the Rebel forces. Teaming agreement, contract for collaboration. Example, Alliance of Rebels and Lando. Term contract, fixed period service agreement. Example, hiring a mercenary for the duration of the conflict. Predictive life cycle, plan scope and costs early. Example, Death Star's construction phases. Adaptive life cycle, embraces change, involves stakeholders. Example, adapting to new information about the Death Star. Iterative life cycle, refines through repetition. Example, testing the Death Star's defenses multiple times. Incremental life cycle, builds functionality in steps. Example, constructing the Death Star in phases. Hybrid life cycle, combines predictive and adaptive. Example, using both detailed plans and adaptable tactics in the mission. Agile life cycles, quick, collaborative iterations. Example, rapid Rebel strategy sessions. Predictive life cycles, fixed scope and schedule. Example, Death Star's detailed blueprint execution. Product life cycle, stages from introduction to withdrawal. Example, Death Star's development and eventual destruction. Project life cycle phases, initiation to closure. Example, from planning to destroying the Death Star. Product against project life cycle, different scopes and durations. Example, Death Star product against its construction project. Corporate knowledge base, repository of information. Example, Death Star plans in the Rebel database. Enterprise environmental factors, influences outside team control. Example, galactic politics affecting the mission. Threat, negative project risk. Example, potential Imperial counterattacks. 3-point estimating, calculates average estimates. Example, estimating the Death Star's completion time. Time box, set duration for tasks. Example, deadline for the Rebel attack plan. Tolerance, acceptable range within quality standards. Example, varying size of thermal exhaust port. Total float, schedule activities allowable delay. Example, delaying fighter deployment without mission impact. TQM, continuous quality improvement. Example, constantly improving X-Wing maintenance procedures. Transfer risk, shifting risk to another. Example, ensuring starfighters against destruction. Trend analysis, forecasting using past data. Example, predicting enemy fleet movements from past encounters. Trigger condition, sign risk is imminent. Example, unusual Imperial fleet movements near Death Star. Unique identification code, specific sequence for WBS elements. Example, codes for each Rebel squadron. User story, need described by stakeholder. Example, a pilot's request for better targeting computers. Validate scope, confirm deliverable acceptance. Example, approval of Death Star plans by Rebels. Value stream mapping, analyzing process for value. Example, streamlining X-Wing production line. Value stream, activities for delivering product service. Example, from X-Wing design to battle readiness. Variable sampling methods, continuous data measurement. Example, checking varied blaster outputs. Variance analysis, comparing expected and actual. Example, scrutinizing expected versus actual mission casualties. Variance, deviation from expected. Example, unexpected increase in Imperial defenses. WBS dictionary, details for WBS components. Example, descriptions of every part of the mission plan. WBS, project breakdown structure. Example, dividing the mission into actionable segments. Work package, manageable task unit. Example, assembling a starfighter squadron. Work performance data, collected raw project observations. Example, recording time to suit up pilots. Work performance information, analyzed work data. Example, efficiency reports on Rebel training programs. Work shadowing, observing someone's work. Example, a rookie pilot shadowing a veteran. Team development stages, phases of team growth. Example, Rebel team's progression from formation to disbanding. W. Edwards Deming, quality management proponent. Example, influenced Rebel inspection procedures. Joseph M. Duran, quality over 2 levels. Example, Duran's approach influenced the Rebel fleet's quality control. Philip Crosby, quality absolutes. Example, Rebels adopt zero defect standard for missions. Junichi Taguchi, design quality into products. Example, Taguchi methods used for X-Wing design efficiency. William Smith, Six Sigma pioneer. Example, Smith's methodologies streamline Rebel operations. Sigma, measure of variation. Example, analyzing fighter sortie success rates. Relative authority, project against functional manager power. Example, rebel project leader versus squadron leader's authority. PESEL analysis, external factor analysis. Example, studying galactic politics for mission timing. Risk response strategies. Example, rebels avoid unnecessary engagements, avoid, strengthen X-wings, reduce, ally with smugglers, share, accept some losses, accept. Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Motivational theory and psychology, comprising a 5-tier model of human needs. Example, rebels' basic needs met before fighting. McGregor's theory X and theory Y, management theories on employee motivation. Example, rebel leaders use theory Y, inspiring volunteer pilots. McClellan's achievement theory, people are motivated by achievement, affiliation, and power. Example, pilots display need for achievement in battle. Hertzberg's motivation theory differentiates hygiene factors from motivators. Example, rebels motivated by mission, motivator, beyond just survival, hygiene. Conflict management strategies, approaches to resolve disagreements. Example, rebels use collaboration to strategize Death Star's destruction. Velocity chart, shows team's work rate over time. Example, charting rebel mechanics repair speeds. Iteration cumulative flow diagram, displays work progress across stages. Example, visualizing stages of rebel attack planning. Earned value management reports, performance measurement reports. Example, assessing cost versus progress in rebel operations. Variance analysis reports, compares actual to planned performance. Example, analyzing discrepancies in rebel attack timings. Burn-up chart, shows completed work trend. Example, tracking completion of rebel mission tasks. Burn-down chart, visualizes remaining work in sprint. Example, rebels' daily progress in mission preparation. Information radiators, public displays of project information. Example, a visible mission countdown for rebel fighters. Lessons learned knowledge base, archive of past project insights. Example, database of past rebel missions reviews. Positive risk strategies, approaches to optimize opportunities. Example, rebels use exploit to ensure mission success. WS dictionary, details of WBS components. Example, specs for each part of the Death Star raid plan.